To first start, can you state your full name, pronouns, and introduce yourself with a bit about your background?
My name is Martha Gershun. I use feminine pronouns, she, her, hers. And I live in Fairway, Kansas, where 6 years ago, I was a living kidney donor. My interest in this is broad and longstanding, and I know we'll talk about that today. But maybe the most important thing is that my experience led me to write a book called Kidney to Share, which was published by Cornell University Press in 2021. And that's given me great access to talk to many people throughout the transplant network.
What encouraged you to be involved with organ donation?
We have a family history of organ donation. And often when you talk to organ donors, you're going to hear that story. My beloved cousin Anne, who lived in Omaha, had polycystic kidney disease, which is a terrible genetically passed on disease, which affects large numbers of people in many families. It's the most common genetically transmitted disease in our country. And eventually Anne needed dialysis and she was going to need a kidney. This was in 2002. I wasn't going to be able to be a donor for Anne. She's not a biological cousin. She's married to my biological cousin. And it was a busy time in my life. I had a job. I had 2 kids. I didn't think very much about being a living donor at that time. But of course, we were all tracking Anne's health and her situation very carefully. And when her best friend in Omaha turned out to be a match, we were all overjoyed at the successful transplant. And this was pretty early in transplantation. This was almost 20 years ago, but the surgery was a success. My cousin lived another 9 years, time that we got to have Thanksgivings and Passovers and many family events. So like many organ donors, there was a previous experience in my life that showed me what the gift of a kidney can mean both to an individual and to their entire family.
That's truly inspiring, and I'm very grateful for that. I hear that sometimes it's very hard to find organ donors, and matching takes so much time, and I just can't think of how stressful that may have been for you.
We we were worried, but we weren't educated. And so I just knew we were waiting. This may be one of those situations where the more you know, the harder the wait is. Though, as I have talked to kidney patients and their families around the country since my donation, one of the things I've learned is that very proactive marketing, communications, getting the word out can often surface the most unlikely donor. And I always tell people, if just waiting is hard, then go ahead and act. There are things you can do, non-medical things, you can do on your own behalf.
And I read about your books and essays on the website you provided me, so thank you for that. And I'm truly inspired by your efforts in driven writing. For those who have not seen them yet, can you detail them and discuss any challenges you have gone through in writing them?
One of the reasons I decided to write the book is that I faced some challenges donating my kidney. As you know from reading a little bit about my story, I read about a woman in our local newspaper. She actually lived in Fort Lauderdale. I live in Kansas City, but her family was here. She had been raised here, and she needed a kidney. In her case, it was a second transplant. Deb had been diagnosed with kidney disease in law school when she was in her late 20s, and then later diagnosed with diabetes. So she received a combination kidney pancreas transplant from a deceased donor. If you need pancreas, it has to come from a deceased donor. That isn't something a living donor can give you. And so people who need both automatically fall in the deceased donor pool. That's what they're looking for. Those pancreas are still working for Deb, but her kidney was failing. And I was very moved by the story, in part because of my own cousin's story. And I called the Mayo Clinic where she was listed to see if I could be a donor. One of the hardest things about the process was easy for me. I was a perfect match. And that's extraordinary. The odds of a complete stranger with no familial connection being a perfect both blood type and HLA tissue type match for a complete stranger are about 1 in 100,000. So the very fact that I matched with Deb is a miracle. But from that point on, the process was really hard. It wasn't hard medically, the testing, things like that, it worked out fine and I passed all of those things. But there were both logistic and financial barriers that I felt, along with my husband, we had to work very hard to overcome. And I found that very annoying because I was trying to do this good thing called give away my kidney. And so in the process of complaining about these barriers to a very good friend of mine who happens to be both a writer and a physician, she said, write a book. So I did.
I love how you took the initiative to do all of that. I can only imagine how much time and dedication that would have taken. So, do you have any current projects that you would like to talk about?
I do. So having written the book, I entered the world of kidney transplantation and other organ transplantation as well. It's a broad network, and really within that network, for the most part, only kidneys and livers fall in the living donor space. Hearts, lungs are transplants that traditionally must come from someone who is deceased. But in order to promote the book, I went on book tour. It was virtual because this was in the middle of COVID. And I spoke at over 35 ethics centers, transplant clinics, hospitals, medical schools, to students, to researchers, to scientists, to doctors, about my experience donating a kidney, about the barriers I faced, and about how they, people on the front lines at transplant clinics, might be able to reduce some of those barriers. And in the course of that work, I got involved with a fabulous organization called the Kidney Transplant Collaborative, which has as its mission to increase the number of kidneys available for transplantation in the United States.
And can you describe what it's like to work with a community of patients or who is waiting to receive an organ or in the process of donating one?
So we spend a lot of time talking to people who are waiting for organs. And I don't work in any official mentoring capacity. I work in you found me through the newspaper, you found me through Google, you're in my community here in Kansas City. I've talked to several people considering donating. I have a close relative on the East Coast who donated a kidney for her mother. And she and I had a lot of conversations as well. The things that I want patients to understand are that donating a kidney is not life-threatening to the donor. As far as medical procedures go, I think it's pretty complicated for the surgeon, but it is much easier to take a kidney out than it is to put a kidney in someone else and reattach it in ways that will make it work. And so having a kidney removed is a perfectly healthy person, right? Didn't have cancer, didn't have acute kidney injury, don't have polycystic kidney disease, someone whose abdomen and body are healthy. To remove it is in some ways not very different from taking out a uterus, taking out a gallbladder, taking out babies in a C-section. Babies are a lot bigger than kidneys. We take things out of abdomens surgically fairly routinely. So I think people overestimate this danger, in part so that they don't have to think about asking a relative or a friend to do this. And people in the general community seem to overstate it because they don't want to think about doing it themselves. If it's too easy, shouldn't we all be doing it? Of course, we know the answer to that is that it doesn't work that way. Donating blood is very, very easy, very, very safe, and still not half of Americans choose to do that. So one thing I want a patient to know is that if you're on the search for a living kidney donor, you are not asking someone to do something that will threaten their life. Longitudinal data goes out about 20 years on living kidney donors is very good. We live just as long as everyone else. And the medical evaluation that precedes donation is so extensive. I spent 3 days at the Mayo Clinic and had 26 tests and appointments. That medical evaluation is so thorough that we know people going into this have the mental, emotional, and physical wherewithal to do well. The other thing I'd like patients to understand is that you're actually offering a gift to the potential donor. donating my kidney to Deb, saving her life. Her birthday was a few weeks ago. I saw how she was celebrating on Facebook. Literally knowing that you have saved another person's life, whether it's someone you can watch on Facebook and meet with periodically, or it's a complete stranger and it's anonymous, it's such a meaningful feeling that a patient isn't depriving a potential donor, they're offering an opportunity to a potential donor.
Would you say that's the most rewarding part of your career?
Yeah, I'd go even further. Other than having my two children, and more recently, in the past couple of years, my two twin grandsons, it's the most rewarding thing of my life.
That's wonderful. And we were talking about some misconceptions about organ donation. And is there anything you would like to talk to specifically younger people who are getting to the legal age to donate? Is there anything you would like to tell them specifically?
I think the most important thing for younger people to do is to be sure that they've signed their organ donor card and talk to their families about what they would like to happen to their organs after they are dead. A lot of younger people don't bother to sign their organ donor card because being young makes you feel invincible. And even people who sign their organ donor card, and a whole lot of people in America do, if you don't talk to your family, the odds of those wishes being followed in a hospital, in a crisis, are lower. They're not zero, but they're lower. And I think the most important thing young people can do is pave that path that says, if the unthinkable should happen, let's make meaning out of my physical body. It will be comfort to my relatives. It doesn't replace someone, it doesn't fix the tragedy, but it's a kind of comfort and a kind of peace. The other reason I was emphasizing that aspect of transplantation and donation is that there are many organs people need and that people can donate, which a living organ donor cannot. So we have a shortage of kidneys in this country. About 90,000 people are on the waiting list for kidneys. But we also have a shortage of lungs, of pancreas, of hearts, of skin tissue, of intestines, of many other things, which can only be donated after death. The other thing, and I always tell people this, is if you are a deceased donor, you can donate 2 kidneys. I only got to donate 1.
And are there any advancements or innovations in organ transplantation or donation that you're excited about?
There are. I join the ranks of people who are potentially very excited about xenotransplantation, the use of organs from other species. The very recent partial success about using pig kidneys has been very unexpected. We thought it would take a lot longer for that to work. The first living recipient of a pig kidney just died in Boston after about 3 months. But 3 months is way longer than most of us thought he was going to last. And he was able to leave the hospital, spend time with his family. This was someone who was going to die within days if that surgery had not been performed. We only do experimental surgery on people who are really going to die right away. So we don't know yet how successful that might be if it's performed on someone who is not so seriously ill. These are genetically modified pigs to harvest their kidneys specifically. We don't just take random porky off the farm. But I'm very excited about the potential there. We already use pig valves in heart surgery very effectively. I'm also excited about some of the increased innovation in what we would call external perfusion. In a living donor transplant, like between me and Deb, the kidney doesn't have to travel very far. We were in adjoining operating suites. So the surgeon took my kidney out, somebody walked it down the hall on ice, and they put it in Deb. Maybe they washed it off before they put it in Deb, but I don't think it was out of my body half an hour. But in the case of deceased donors, often there's quite a time difference between when the organ is able to be removed and when it is going to be transplanted. And our traditional way of preserving the usefulness of that organ has been to put it on ice, to cool it so that its function, it doesn't need very much. That really reduces how far we can fly kidneys. It causes some organs to be unusable if there's a flight delay, if there's a weather delay. Every time I'm on an airplane and it sits on the runway for 3 hours, I think, oh, I hope there's not a kidney sitting on this airplane waiting, because I can wait the 3 hours, but the kidney can't. But there are some real innovations in external perfusion. Sort of think of a FedEx ice box that would actually pump liquid and blood through the kidney while it's being transported to increase the usable life. The other thing I'm personally very excited about is legislation, and this is part of my work with the Kidney Transplant Collaborative, which is an advocacy organization. It's a nonprofit with an advocacy bent. There are a lot of financial barriers to being a living donor. This was so easy medically, but financially, all of your medical expenses are covered, of course, by the recipient's insurance, whether it's Medicare or private insurance. But I had to travel to the Mayo Clinic, which is 6 hours away from my home, had to stay in hotels, had to pay for food. I was retired by then, so I didn't miss work, but my husband was still working. He had to miss 16 days of paid work. He's a professional, so it didn't impact our take-home pay, but someone who's paid hourly, people could lose their jobs. People could not have the money they need to pay the rent. And the Kidney Transplant Collaborative is putting forward a bill in Congress called the Love Act. And one of its provisions would be to clarify that practical reimbursement is available for kidney donors so that they're financially neutral, so that no one has to pay to donate an organ. There's some other provisions to that bill, which I'm really excited about. One is a national education program about kidney and organ donation. I think everybody should know more about this. And the other is a provision to fund navigators within the medical system for both donors and recipients. One of the hardest things about going through the system is that, and I did have a donor coordinator at the Mayo Clinic, but she worked in a hospital. She wasn't always available. She didn't always know the answers to my questions. And she was responsive. If I wrote to her on their portal, she would write back. I needed somebody who was calling me and saying, hey, did you get that blood test done? Hey, Martha, how are you feeling about it? It was 9 months between the day I first called the Mayo Clinic and our successful transplant. There's a lot of things that come up in 9 months, and I could have used more handholding. And I think that many donors need more handholding to move them through the system. I had so many advantages. I'm educated, I'm upper middle class, I'm white, I speak English as a first language, I'm used to advocating for myself. I like to talk, as you can see. And you could imagine a family without those advantages struggling through a system that even I found really very daunting, even with all my privilege.
Related to my next question, actually, which was what improvements or changes could be made to organ donation system to increase either donation rates or streamline the process as you were talking about?
So absolutely, I think a nationwide navigation system could make a tremendous difference so that you don't even have to ask. Someone might not even know to ask for that kind of help, but people who are trained, either because they've been through the process themselves or properly trained, to take someone start to finish all the way through the system. I absolutely think we need federal reimbursement for every out-of-pocket expense and lost wage expense for both a donor and their caregiver. Most transplant clinics won't do this unless you bring your caregiver with you, both to the workup session and to the surgery. So that's 2 people who could potentially be out of work. I don't know very many families that could sustain the loss of 2 paychecks for any particular amount of time. There's some very generous employers in the country who, of course, will bridge that gap for organ donors, but it's uncommon and it's almost never available to hourly workers. I think something to recognize is that kidney disease is often a disease of poverty, and it is certainly a disease with a race-associated correlation. Black people are 3 times more likely to have chronic kidney disease than white people, and Hispanic people are 2.5 times more likely. And also people who are low resourced are more likely to have kidney disease. It's a disease that often follows obesity, diabetes, hypertension, many things that have both a racial and a poverty component. And so to say that low resourced families are more likely to have a family member with kidney disease, but we're not going to make it easy for any of their family members to donate isn't right.
And are there any particular aspects of organ donation that you want the general public to know more about?
I think everyone should know that there are two ways that organs can be brought into the system to save someone's life. One is that you can say on your driver's license, upon my death, if it is possible, I would like any usable organs and tissue to be donated to help save or better someone else's life. And then talk to your family about it. I feel like that's the part I always want to highlight in yellow. And then talk to your family about that decision. And then the other path, which is living organ donation, and it's not right for everyone. It has to be the right time in your life. Your health has to be good. You have to be able to step away from work or school or childcare or elder care for about 4 weeks, sometimes longer. If your job is physical, if you're working on roads in the heat in the Texas sun, you're going to be out longer than 4 weeks. If you have a desk job, 2 to 4 weeks might make more sense. But not everyone has to do the living donor path. It's complicated and it has to be the right time in your life. And your body has to say, yes, I'm healthy enough. But everyone could sign up to be a deceased donor. And I just wish more people in America would do that.